Hello, and welcome to the viewers joining us here on Rogers Community Television. My name is Gordon McKay, and I'm going to be your host for this evening's discussion. Straight Talk is a public affairs series sponsored by the Midland Cultural Centre. In that series, we deal with issues that are important to the residents of North Simcoe. This is usually done in front of a live audience at the Midland Cultural Centre. But like so many things with COVID, we've had to improvise and go virtual, and I want to thank Rogers Television for covering this virtually tonight. We're going to be dealing with a very controversial topic, that of Black Lives Matter and racism in Canada. Now, I've come from a white privileged background, and while I've been aware of racism, it's always been on the periphery or in the past. But recent events, especially those in the US, have shone a light on what racism really means in 2020. And as we're seeing, it's not just a few bad apples, it seems to be systemic. It affects our culture, it affects our institutions, and affects us as a society. But this is not the US, this is Canada. So it was a bit of a shock to have a group of young people hold a Black Lives Matter march on June 20th in the town of Midland. So if we don't have a racism issue here in Canada, what was the point of the march? So tonight we're going to talk to the two organizers for that march. Why did they march? What experience have they had with racism here in Ontario? And we're going to hear about their views as to how we resolve this structural problem in our society. So I'd like to now introduce you to our two panelists who are going to speak to us tonight. The first one is Mr. Amani Chavakuli. Amani is a 19-year-old undergrad student at Western University in London, Ontario. He immigrated to Canada from South Africa at the age of 2 with his parents and his brother. He had moved to Midland in 2007 and moved here, as I said, for 14 years. He has been a graduate of the St. Teresa's Catholic High School in Midland and is currently into his second year at Medical Sciences at Western University. So Mani, welcome.
Hi.
Is there anything else you'd care to say by way of introduction to our audience?
Oh, no, that was an amazing introduction. Thank you so much, Gore. Thank you for having me here. Yeah, I'm going to my second year. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, our pleasure. We're looking forward to a good conversation. Our second guest is Miss Emily Duckett. Emily was born in Midland in January 2000. Her parents are of English, Scottish, and Jamaican heritage, so she is proudly biracial. She's attended St. Teresa's High School, where she's played on sports teams, choreographed dance shows, and has constantly battled racism issue with her peers. After graduating high school in 2018, Emily has left Midland to pursue her interests in performance at York University. She currently resides in Toronto and hopes to get involved in the creative and performing arts. Emily, again, welcome to you.
Yes, thank you for having me. Thank you for holding this discussion. I think it's really important we have it at this time.
Excellent. Well, as we talked about, this all started with this march on June 20th in Little Lake Park here in Midland. So for the members of our audience, would you please just sort of describe what happened with the event, how it took place, what happened that particular day, how many attended? Mani, do you want to start with this? And then we'll have Emily fill in the parts that you missed.
Sure. So initially what happened was Emily approached me with this idea. And at first I was a bit hesitant, seeing as though Midland is like a predominantly white town. So I was a bit hesitant as to doing this in our area, just for fear of it being ill-received or, you know, if there was going to be just like 30 people there. But nevertheless, I knew it was really important and I really wanted to do it. So we first kind of like started out kind of like me and her communicating back and forth as to like what we needed to do and what was needed to happen for it to go down. So we needed to pick a date. We needed to pick a location. We needed to make sure all like the promotional things were done properly. We did a social media page on Facebook, a Facebook event page. We did an Instagram page as well that now has around 400 followers. And we also had to do like physical promotion, like flyers. So we went to this place to get flyers and they were kind enough to donate to us downtown. So we went around our communities, not just in Midland, but also in Elmville and Penetang and Wyville as well. And yeah, it required a lot of preparation. We also brought along volunteers as well. And I'm sure Emily can also speak to more of that too.
So when we planned it, we knew we wanted to have like people speak at our protests, because I just attended a protest in Waterloo, and there was these speakers and they were amazing and they were so moving. And when I talked to Money about it, about organizing this, he had the idea like we need to have speakers here. So we reached out to some of our peers in Midland. We had Megan Duckett, Chelsea Davenport, Tatiana Fisher, Anissa Josiah, Selena Bob, Taylor Janak, Money, and myself. And we asked them if they'd be open to speaking at our march we were planning and talk about their experience with racism, especially that in Midland, because we know firsthand that being people of color in Midland is hard to deal with. And we wanted the people who attended the march to hear that firsthand from their peers, people they have grown up with. So that was a big part of planning our march as well, having speakers so they could share their experiences with that. So on the day of the protest, we had everyone come, all of our volunteers who were handing out water and masks and gloves if anyone needed it, who were amazing and supported us this whole time. We had our speakers come. And then I'm not sure around how many people attended the march total. That's the one thing, and Money, if you could answer that question.
So approximately, we didn't really have a good system as to like how to count, but approximately there was around 400 to 500 people, which is a lot more than what I initially expected. And also just to touch on the reason why I wanted to do this with my friend Emily was because I just wanted us to kind of personalize this issue to our region, because although like what's going on in America, of course, act as a catalyst for, you know, what's going on in our world, I really wanted us to realize that there's also a problem here and it needs to also be addressed.
Me and Money have been friends since like the 8th or like 7th grade, since we were in elementary.
Yeah.
And I remember like from the earliest on, we talked about like when we were young about racism in Midland, and like not being able to wait to get out of Midland to be in like in a more accepting like community and stuff. And Amani and me have both like moved on and gone to school, and we say how like happy we are we've left Midland and like are in such like flourishing communities where we're accepted and celebrated.
Mm-hmm. It really sounds like an impressive amount of organization you put into this, and a lot of thought as to how you wanted to conduct it. So well done. But I guess we all look at this at the end. Did it have the impact and the effect you were looking for?
I think the impact we wanted.
Sorry, Emily, please.
Oh, go ahead, Emily.
I think we just wanted people in Midland, because obviously we did this because we wanted to stand in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. And I wanted to show our support to that. But like Amani was saying, to personalize this event, we wanted like the people of Midland and the surrounding towns to like leave the event like feeling that our words have affected them, and they can go back home and reflect on like how they've contributed to racism and how they've played a part in it. So I think after the march, like a lot of like my peers and people I don't even know and people during the march came up to me and Money and our speakers and were saying like, thank you so much for doing this. Like I've been racist in the past, and like I just want to acknowledge that, and I want to change and I want to grow. And people are saying like, my daughter's been through this, my friend's been through this, and people are just coming out of the woodwork and saying how much this protest and like our social media pages, the things we've been posting have been helping them to learn and grow, which I think is one of our really big goals.
And also to add on to that in terms of like impact, even by being here on this platform speaking with you, I think is also really indicative of the fact of how much of an impact like this event has had on our community. And also even on the Instagram pages, a lot of people are asking if there's going to be another one. And a lot of people are asking if there's going to be another one maybe in Penetang or in other different areas. So this definitely was made waves in our community, I think.
Well done. Sounds like it's had quite an impact. But let's step back from the immediacy of the event itself and I guess ask the fundamental question. And I want to see through your eyes. Obviously, this is a white guy talking to you and never had to deal with systemic racism. What does it mean to grow up Black in our society? Imani, you want to start with that?
Sure. So I think that within the context of our society, I think it's important to realize that, you know, historically how like it's been built upon, and the history, and understanding the history will help us understand why things are the way they are. I think is really important. So anecdotally, when I first moved to Midland, the very first day of school, I remember being picked on because I was Black. And it was the very first day. And I remember my first grade teacher at the time had to tell my parents, and we had to go to the principal's office. But of course, nothing happened. So being Black in this society, or rather, let's say in Midland, isn't an easy thing. I was ostracized at a very young age. And I think that being Black is constantly kind of questioned. I think people are kind of like there's this sense of like kind of guilt, I think. And even when we would have conversations in the classroom about race or about different things revolving it, it was very kind of watered down, or it was very kind of like not dealt with properly. So yeah, I think that has a lot to do with it, especially being like a child growing up in this community, or rather in this society.
Okay. Emily, what has been your path through racism in our community?
I think growing up in Midland, I didn't understand how much the racism had affected me until I left. Until I moved to Toronto in 2018 for school, because I went to York University for dance. And at York, I met like so many different people, different colors, different genres, different genders. And I felt so like included and loved in that. And in Midland, you always feel othered in Midland, growing up Black or a person of color. It's so inherent at a young age. I remember being in like a kindergarten classroom and being the only Black girl in the entire class. And you feel so alienated and different because everywhere you look, your white peers, your white teachers, your white friends, your white role models, they're all white. And growing up as a child and seeing that, I think it taught me to hate my Blackness from a young age. And it took me till I left Midland to like fully accept my Blackness and start to love it, because I was taught for so long that like white was beauty and white was success, and everywhere I looked, like white was being praised. And I never understood like why I resented my Blackness so much until I left Midland.
Okay. So did you step back then from engaging in society? Obviously affected you personally, but what did it cause you to do about your behaviors? How did you react to that in these young years?
Pardon me, sorry?
How did you react to that in your young years? You just withdraw from the class, or how did you deal with that?
I think when I was younger, I tried to hide my Blackness. Like I used to straighten my hair for like years at a time. People used to tell me, like kids on the playground used to tell me like, you're not really Black, you're like mocha. Like I used to have my skin color like demeaned to a coffee. So I think as a young age, you just try to blend in and you try to like denounce your Blackness. You try to fit in with your white peers to the best of your ability. And I just tried to do that to survive as long as I could. And then when I grew up and I realized like I was suppressing all my Black like features and all my Black like love, is when I like thoroughly started growing as a person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But one would argue, and look at both you now and your short CVs I have in front of me here, that you've done very well. You're a very progressive, very talented youth. Has it been fundamental in terms of how it's affected you? And can you see it in others who are of color in our community?
I think that when we talk about children too growing up, and we live in, like, as Emily said, that it garnered a lot of self-hate, and I can also attest to this as well. I think when it comes to children growing up and then the added element of racism, you tend to internalize a lot of self-hate, and that really alters with your mental health, and it alters with your self-esteem. Personally, at a point, I was really depressed. And I attribute it to the fact because of a lot of the racist experiences that I had to encounter, a lot of like the ostracization that occurred. So when it comes to, I think, children growing up, I think this is a really important conversation to have, because all like the people of color children that are growing up deserve to be growing up in a community where they don't feel that they're other, they don't feel that they're ostracized, they don't feel discriminated against because they're different. So I think it's really important that we have like these types of conversations.
Okay, so going back to your years of growing up, you sort of expect, especially at school, the adult to step in and straighten this out. Was there any attempt at that? Did anyone try to help deal with this quiet racism that was going on?
So for me personally, like throughout the years, like I've tried to, go to like the adult figures or, for example, teachers, because unfortunately, a lot of these experiences happened at school. But it honestly wasn't dealt with a sense of severity or a sense of seriousness that the situation does need. So a lot of the times it was kind of like brushed to the side. And I do attribute that to the fact that, all the teachers were white. So it was hard for them to kind of sympathize with the experience. So when you have a child coming to you saying, I was called the N-word, or I was treated XYZ because of this, it's hard for them to kind of, deal with that in such a way, because they probably don't have Black children in their homes. So it was hard for them to kind of like sympathize in a way. So when I would try and go to, these teachers and adult figures, it kind of came to a point where I was like, let me not, because, before, like, they didn't really do much. So it kind of turned into this thing where like I had to fight for myself kind of a thing. And that kind of thinking when you're a child that you need to fight for yourself is very damaging. I think it's very damaging to children, because I feel like children need that sense of security, that sense of someone's going to be there for you if something's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Emily, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think to like speak to what Amani said, growing up like in a white school, like Black, no teachers show up for you. Like no teachers show up for Black kids because they don't have Black kids in their home. There's no policies in place as to what's supposed to happen, what disciplinary actions are supposed to be enforced when like some white girl calls me the N-word on the playground. Nothing happened. No one gets detention. No one gets expelled, suspended, anything, because there's no policies in place. So these teachers are just sitting there with like idolized, trying to figure out how to discipline these children who are being racist at such an early age. And I think when you're young, like Amani was saying, to have to fight for yourself and have to like protect yourself is a really hard thing to do as a child. And it's a hard mentality for children, because teachers are there to protect children, to like stick up for children, and no one showed up for Black kids.
So as you said, the teachers are there to stand up, and if they don't know what the issues are, did any of them actually call it out? Did they say, this is racist, this is wrong in that regard? Or was it just, oh, kids playing in the schoolyard, what do you expect kind of thing?
I think,
yeah, go ahead.
I think in my experience, it was a lot of like, kids will be kids.
Yeah.
Like, I think like when I was called the N-word in the fourth grade, the teachers, I think their thinking was that we were children and I didn't understand the severity of the word, so it must not have affected me. And because we're children and the kids just say the darnest things and kids throw words around, like it must not mean anything. And so they just like let these white children get off scot-free and have no disciplinary actions, because they think like it's not as severe as it would be if you were older.
Mm-hmm. Without realizing the hurt that it's left with you as this has happened. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Let's step out of school for the moment. Obviously, you've observed Midland in a broader sense. Is there racism in Midland? And by that, is it open that people will just, as you said, call out the N-word or have racist jokes, or is it much more subtle in terms of, we'll just sort of ignore the problem and walk away from it? Yep. Amani, do you want to start with that?
Sure. So I've had an instance where it was overt, but for the most part, it is very kind of like a covert, kind of not very open, in the sense that there's a lot of, for example, microaggressions. There's a lot of like sly remarks of like, oh, like, are you from here? Like, I wouldn't think someone like you would be from here. Those types of comments that because you are Black, there's no possible way that you're from a town like Midland, type of thing. So there's a lot of like those covert microaggressions that I've experienced, that my parents have experienced. I asked permission from my mom, but she's also had experience that people like undermining her as a profession. People thinking that she works at the clerk, like she's not like an actual doctor sometimes. Sometimes she's mistaken for as the nurse. So even in positions, people, it's kind of seen as like, how is a Black person occupying this space? So like, to your point, I think it's more of like a unintentional kind of covertness that people don't realize the harm in their words.
Okay, before I go to Emily with that question, just use the term microaggression. Could you expand a little bit for our audience as to what you mean by that?
Oh, yes, sure. So a lot of people don't know what microaggressions mean. So microaggressions is basically kind of like remarks or kind of like behaviors or types of like different like sly comments someone would say that are kind of like underhanded and a lot of racist undertones. So it's not, my personal opinion is that they're just as harmful, but it's not as like covertly like in your face racist, if that makes sense.
Okay, I think it does. It's all these little things that make up our day that we don't think about, but nonetheless, you add them up and it's racism.
Yeah.
Emily, your thoughts on how would you characterize the society you see around you in terms of openly racist or covertly racist or Canadian, or how would you characterize it?
I think Midland's like a mixture of both. I think in a lot of youth, like in a lot of like our people our age, like our peers, we see a lot of openly racist remarks. We see a lot of like white kids saying the N-words in songs, white kids calling their friends the N-words, white kids making openly racist remarks to me at parties thinking it's going to be okay, thinking it's like some kind of joke. And I think with our older generation, we see a lot of like covertly racist things. Like when my mom's white and my dad's black, so I'm biracial. And so me and my siblings, we don't we're not dark skinned like our dad is, we're a mixture. So when people used to see my mom walking with like me and my 5 siblings and we're all like different colors and different skin tones, people would ask my mom if we're adopted or if like we're her stepchildren, or if we were her biological children, which is just like another microaggression. It's things like that. It's things like people asking me if I'm going to college and not university, people asking me if I play basketball, people asking me where I'm from, what my mix is, like just little things like that that you don't think are racist, but are, like Amani said, are just as hurtful.
Okay.
And
sorry, Amani?
Oh, no, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, I was going to swing us to we're talking about microaggressions and how they become additive. And the term that we're hearing more often now is systemic racism. And this is, I forget who actually said, well, it's not really a system, we don't have it organized and this sort of thing, but nonetheless, it's embedded in what we see around us. Are you aware of that? And how would you characterize what you're seeing? Amani?
Yeah, so systemic racism definitely is present here in Canada. For example, I can speak out to my cousins who also immigrated here in Canada, for example. When they immigrated here to Canada, they were assumed to be, like they were placed in, for example, how we do like academic streamlining, they were placed in like the lower rung just because, for no other reason by the fact that they were, Black. And that is an example of how like the institutions themselves will already like place, immigrants or people of color already at like a lower rung of like academic. So institutionalized racism is definitely a real thing here in Canada. And that's just due to the fact that just because of our history and how this country was also built upon as well, and how, quite frankly, the world was too.
Okay. Emily, have you had any experience with this? Would you characterize some of our institutions with systemic racism?
I think personally, like I've just noticed, like within Midland and like our society, systematic racism is just like more little things like microaggression, because I'm not like out in the world yet and I haven't had all these different experiences yet, but just like little things like people assuming I'm going to college instead of university, like me being offered like extra time on assignments and things like that, when in reality I'm a straight A student, like just little things like that. And like I danced competitively at in high school, and people used to like, I used to teach at different classes, and I remember different parents would come up to me and be like, oh, is the teacher here? And I'm like, I'm the teacher. And they're like, oh, are you the assistant? And I'm like, no, I'm the teacher. Like I teach this class. So it's just like little forms of microaggressions I've experienced systematically, but still they're just as hurtful.
Okay. No, you're quite right. It's all these little things that add up. And as we said, we always look for systemic, that it's written down. It must be part of how it's organized. But we build our society up with all of our interactions. And eventually it does add up to racism or not racist. So it has been hurtful in that respect. How does it tie in to your views with other things that are challenging in society? And this goes everything from poverty to food security to health. Do you see any connection there with racism and what has happened to people who are afflicted with these kinds of challenges?
Mm-hmm. So when we talk about racism, I think it's important to note that like racism and class are linked. Classism and racism are linked. So when you see like the poorest communities, the demographically, people who are in the lowest socioeconomic graphics is Black people and people of color. So when we're talking about poverty and different things like that, there's a disproportionate amount of Black people, just even in Ontario here, that are of low income. And that's due to the fact of how racism and class are inextricably linked. Also, when we talk about in the healthcare system as well, and even in the education systems and universities and stuff like that, the lowest admitted students, for example, are people of color and Black people. So a lot of these issues are persistent like racism is persistent in a lot of these different facets and areas of our society. And I think more knowledge needs to be put into that and more education needs to put into that, because that's how we can be able to, address the problem and realize it needs to be like administrative change, like legislative changes, policy changes, and a lot of these things. Like recently, U of T, for example, I think this year had like their highest amount of admitted Black students into their medical school, and it wasn't even that many. So a lot of these things are like they're multi-leveled and they're persistent.
Okay. So let me just push back a little bit. Emily, this one is for you. If the viewer is watching this program, you're seeing yourself, Amani, and Emily here is obviously Black, very talented, very capable, university bound and doing creative things. So we're not seeing what you just said. I'm seeing people that have overcome the challenges and are doing quite well. So how would you respond to that?
I think just because you see one Black person doing well doesn't mean our whole race is thriving. I think just because like me and Amani are attending university and getting university degrees doesn't mean there isn't kids just like us across the country or across the globe even that are like living in poverty and living like meal to meal and things like that and are not getting the school education they need because they don't have money for bus fare to get to school on time. So I think just because you see me and Amani doing well doesn't mean that our whole race is thriving.
Mm-hmm. And also to add on to that too, just because like in a system, just because individuals within a system are doing good doesn't mean what's going on within the overall grand scheme of things isn't what's actually going on. That makes sense.
It does. But again, just to not pursue this too long, but obviously you were able to overcome these systemic hurdles in there and do quite well. So I realize there's a variety as to people's capabilities and aptitudes and that sort of thing. So could a well-intentioned Black person do reasonably well the way we are systemically structured right now?
I think it's also important to realize that although I am a Black person, I do have the privilege of being a middle-class Black person. For example, both my parents are doctors. There's an economic privilege that I personally have that helps me. I have a privilege that my parents are paying for my tuition, right? Not everybody has that. So although, to your question, although that I'm in this position and I am Black, there's many different intersections of a person that will give them a privilege in the sense that will help them into where they are. So although, yes, I'm a Black person, I do have a privilege, of being in a financial stable household, for example, that, helps me with the fact that, I'm able to go to university, that I'm able to, wear clothes or pay a phone bill or have Wi-Fi. A lot of these things a lot of people don't have. So I think, I definitely do think a well-intentioned Black person can, but it's all about resources. It's all about access. It's all about economic privilege too, and different things like that that will help them, pursue these things, if that makes sense.
Sorry, Emily?
just to add to that as well, just like the layers that there is to privilege. I think like I'm myself privileged because I'm light skinned, I'm fair skinned, and to white people, to the masses, like I'm more accepted than like my black peers are with darker skin. So if I were to go for an interview with a girl who's darker than me and we have the same credentials, I would likely get hired over her because my blackness is accepted because I'm an acceptable shade of black. But her dark skin makes her a lesser candidate for the job, even though we could be equally qualified. So you could have all the right tools and all the right credentials and everything to succeed, but then the system can still beat you down because of the color of your skin.
Okay, so there's some workarounds, and I guess Amani said if you've got enough money, you can overcome a lot of barriers, and I guess that's sort of a universal truth. I wasn't aware that there was a shading of color difference, Emily, that you bring forward, but again, I have to see it through your eyes. I've not been aware of that, but that's an intriguing little thought. Mm-hmm. How would you describe Canadians in general? Do they accept that there's a racism issue, or are we in quiet denial? Or have we just sort of put the whole thing out of mind and don't even want to talk about it? Emily?
I think we're in, like, obviously there are different people within Canada who have different mindsets on this and people who believe Canada is racist, like Amani and myself. And there are people, but I think to generalize, I think that Canada is like, one, quietly ignoring the problem. Like they're just like, oh, that's the States. Like we're not racist, we're Canada, that's the States. And I think they're just like sweeping it under the rug like we've been doing for years and years and years. And just thinking because we're Canada and we have free healthcare and gay marriage and this and this and this, that we're not racist. But I think for years, like people like myself and Amani could tell you otherwise.
And also to add on to that too, because, you know, we are bordering the States and a lot of our media too is bombarded with American news and stuff. We constantly do this thing where we compare ourselves to them without actually acknowledging the problems that are persistent here. And what that does, if you constantly look at something that's worse than what your thing is, you tend to forget that your thing also has problems. Like you need to water your own garden too. So there is a lot of this comparison and it fosters this environment where we tend to ignore a lot of the issues here and tend to think that we are in some post-racial utopia, when in reality, a lot of different people of color and Black people within different communities here in Canada can, you know, attest to, you know, the opposite of that, that many of the experiences that we face here is with racism and within many of the institutions and within many of the systems. Yeah.
Interesting. So we have essentially the same underlying racism issue that we see in the US, but there's let's call it a Canadian flavor as to how it presents.
Mm-hmm. And also how we present too, like with, you know, with Justin Trudeau and us being peacekeepers, we're seen as, you know, because we are nice people. We are a nice nation, I think, for the most part. And there is a differences in terms of like our nations, of course, US and Canadian. Canadians are, you know, we're seen as, you know, nice people, you know, when we go abroad and stuff. But I think you can be nice, but you can also be racist too. I think a lot of people tend to think, they like to think their intentions, if their intentions are pure, how they impact someone doesn't matter. But I would argue the opposite. Just because, here, for example, here's an analogy. If I were to accidentally stub your toe and you're wobbling in pain and your toe is now broken, my intention wasn't to break your toe. But now you are in pain. I'm not going to say, oh, you know, my intention wasn't to break your toe. That doesn't take away from the fact that your toe is now broken and we need to go to the hospital, right? So I think we need to understand that there's a difference between impact and intent, and how you impact someone is more important than what your intentions were. If that makes sense.
I think it does. The impact, the pain is there regardless of your intentions. So.
Exactly.
Indeed, indeed. Emily, your thoughts on Canadian as a form of racism, how we present?
I think, like we discussed earlier, it's much like Midland. It's like a quieter racism. And people think just because, like, what Amani was saying, like comparing to the States, like we're not as bad as the States, so we must be good. So I think like people are blinded by that comparison and thinking just because it's not as in your face as the States, it's not like being broadcast, it's on the news. Like just because you don't see or you don't hear about it doesn't mean it's happening. So just because like you're not seeing CNN broadcast all these different things about racism in the media doesn't mean like a little girl is getting called the N-word on the playground, doesn't mean like people aren't getting jobs because they're Black, doesn't mean people are getting denied loans because they're Black. Like it's just because you don't see it and you don't hear about it doesn't mean it's not happening in Canada in our homes.
Okay, well, in the close community, and we talk about these incidents of overt racism, and George Floyd, I guess, is a terrible example of that sort of thing. Do you ever see overt racism like that in small scale, not on the national news, but in our immediate community?
Oh, yeah, I can personally, speak on a personal example. At work one time, a lady told me, that's why people like you shouldn't work here, which is a very openly racist thing to say to someone. So yeah, most definitely there's on a smaller scale, maybe not on national news, like you said, but definitely on a smaller scale, people get those types of comments and those types of behaviors from people.
Mm-hmm. And I realize it's probably a power imbalance there, but how did you handle that insult?
I had to talk to my manager and she had to be escorted out of the restaurant, but yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Emily, any thoughts on the overt practice that we may see in this area?
I think just because like it's not like violence doesn't mean that it's not just as effective. So I think like the George Floyd's case too was like physical violence, like wrongfully like murder. But in different instances, like I think being in money experienced like a lot of verbal abuse. So like I've been working like in like serving jobs for years, and I've had people like ask to have different servers when they see I'm their server. I've had ladies call me like dirty immigrants. I've had like just all these little things. I've had like one of my peers who I grew up with in high school told me no one wanted to date me because I was Black. Like it's just all these little things that are like openly racist that like maybe you don't see on the news. That doesn't mean it's not happening like here, like I said before.
Okay, so when you are presented with overt racism like that, what is the best response? I realize there's probably no general best response, but what is the best way of dealing with that?
I think a lot of times when I experience racism personally, I have to like step back and not respond like emotionally, because I know just like when someone says something racist to me, it's hurtful and I want to respond like in that manner. So I think a lot of times like I have to step back and like obviously when it's at work or things, like I just like keep my mouth shut and keep my head down and like I'll think about it later. But I think like when it's your peers and they're saying something racist, I think the best thing we can do like in today's society is to educate people. But I think people are just saying racist things out of ignorance sometimes and just saying hurtful things out of ignorance. So I think like the best way to kill racist things like that is with education and like acknowledging like the hurt that they're causing. Because
sorry, Emily, you cut you off there.
Oh no, sorry. That's all.
Amani, any thoughts on that?
I think how I tend to combat it too, generally I don't like to engage with racist people, just because it is energetically taxing, in my opinion. It can be kind of, when someone thinks that has these really ignorant racist things about you, I feel like sometimes, in my opinion, engaging with them kind of like, you're playing with fire sometimes. And when you leave the situation, sometimes it's like, did you really change their mind? Or did you not? But, sometimes like Emily said, like it's important to educate them. I think one way, if I were to, is to ask questions. Like ask a question, like, why would you say that to me? Because a lot of times racism is illogical. It logically doesn't make sense. For example, when the lady said that to me, like white people, like, why would you think, I wouldn't work here? For example, that's a question I would pose to her. And, the gears would start going and she would try and think of an answer, which is ultimately racist, right? So a lot of the time, like the answer to a lot of like these racist behaviors, it's illogical. It doesn't make any sense. And I think through them seeing their illogical ways of thinking, they would see that, oh, wow, like maybe this isn't the right way to, like, maybe like this isn't something to go about in terms of like how I treat someone or how I'm acting towards someone. So yeah.
You said, as Emily said here, there is hope through education. In this particular case, did it make a difference?
Oh, I didn't say that, but I'm saying like, if I would.
Oh, if you, sorry.
Yeah.
I could actually
my manager was talked with her. Yeah.
Okay. Well, sometimes, as we all know, we have to call the adult in the room over. Let's swing from what we're seeing to where we'd like to be, sort of looking to the future. And I think it's very important to remind our audience that we have two very young members of society here. with this, and I think we all have underscored the need for youthful engagement in their critical issues affecting us as a society. With racial acceptance, and again, a little bit of historical perspective here, do you see it changing in Canada, or is it sort of a static, fixed entity right now? Are attitudes changing at all? Are we becoming more open or becoming less open? Emily?
I think it's like the same across like wherever you go. Like different people are trying to educate themselves and acknowledge their past, acknowledge their racist tendencies, and change from that. Especially with this whole movement going on, like people are learning things that like they said in the past that are hurtful, that are microaggressions that have hurt the Black community. So I think people are trying to change the best they can, but that doesn't mean that there are still people out there who think like their racist way of thinking is right and their racist way of thinking is okay. So I think people are trying to change. I'm hoping people are trying to change, but I'm not ignorant to say that all of Canada is waking up tomorrow and not being racist.
Okay, I realize we're all sort of scanning the newspapers, but are anything happening either in our community or that you're seeing through the media that underscores that hope that maybe we are getting a little bit better?
So I tend to I want to be a bit more optimistic. I think, like Emily too, like it's with this whole movement going on, there's definitely a sense of like people are realizing more about the racist tendencies, like she said. I think in terms of the media, I personally, being on social media, being on Instagram, being on not so much on Facebook, but mainly being on Instagram and Twitter, I'm seeing a lot, like a huge amount of like support, especially with corporations and companies and brands and stuff like that, and from celebrities and from different like public figures as well. Even our prime minister too going to a protest. So there is a lot of, I think, positive change that I'm personally seeing in the media. Yeah, and I think in terms of like the youth, I really do think Gen Z and millennials are going to change the world for the better. I believe that.
Okay, and just to pick up your earlier point that it's one thing to have good intentions, but it's something else to change your actions. So you're actually seeing not just kind words, but you're actually seeing actions that give you hope.
Like Amani was saying, I've seen like a lot of things on like social media, and I've seen like a lot of my friends who before been like quiet about issues like this and been like quieter when racism comes up as a topic when we're talking. They've been posting like brands to support their own Black individuals, like companies to support, like petitions to sign, fundraisers to sign. So I think like I'm just like seeing actions like on social media. But it'll be interesting to see like once like this whole social distancing thing is over and quarantine's over, when school happens again, like who really is changing their mindset and changing their vocabulary and changing their actions.
And also piggyback off Emily too. Emily actually created a link tree. I don't know if you're familiar with the link tree. I'm sure you can also like describe in further detail, but she basically put like a bunch of Black businesses and petitions and things like that. And a lot of people have messaged our March accounts about how they've interacted with that and have donated to different organizations that were within that link tree. And yeah, that's been really nice to see that, you know, like donations and support for these Indigenous owned and Black owned businesses. Those are actionable steps that people are doing. And that is also giving me a lot of hope too.
Okay, you both mentioned social media here in the last 5 minutes. And I think in general, all looking at social media is changing the world in and of itself. How has social media in particular affected the messaging, affected involvement, affected organization in terms of helping us with this racism challenge? Emily?
I think that social media has been both like a helpful tool and a hindrance when it comes to like the fight against racism.
Okay.
I think it's so easy to like, you can like type in Google like petitions to sign for Black Lives Matter. You can Google like how is racism hurtful. You can Google so many different things. You can go on your Instagram and see so many different accounts who are posting so many helpful things that'll help you like educate yourself and others, and charities to donate to and petitions to sign and things like that. It's such a great tool if you have, because you have all this knowledge at the touch of your fingers. But I think at the same time, it's been a nuisance because I know a lot of people personally who've been posting posted earlier in June, they did the Blackout Day on Instagram. So everyone posted like a black square in their Instagram and hashtag Blackout Tuesday. I think people posted that and then thought in their head, like, I'm okay now. Like, my racist past, I'm fine. Like, I'm not a racist anymore because I posted this black square. I'm an ally because I posted this black square. So I think that people like are hiding behind social media sometimes and thinking because they posted that one black square, they posted that one petition like weeks ago, that they must not be a racist anymore. So I'm just hoping like that the performance activism cease and people are using social media properly to like find different links and find different resources to support this movement.
Okay. Imani, have you seen this?
Yes.
Outreach through social media improve?
Yeah. I do agree with Emily. There's definitely a lot of positive aspects that are coming out. Even different resources people are taking, like different people are reading so many different anti-racist books too. That's also amazing that I'm seeing. However, there is a sense of kind of, like Emily said, performative activism. And basically what that means is that it's basically kind of like virtue signaling in the sense that if you do this thing like on social media to prove you're kind of not racist, but that doesn't materialize itself in your day-to-day lives, it kind of doesn't make any sense for me personally. I think that people need to show up in their day-to-day lives. Like at the dinner table with your aunt that says she doesn't like Black people, that's where you need to jump in and say, hey, like you can't say something like that. You know, so I think now it's about how are you going to be anti-racist in your daily lives, and how are you going to take, you know, the actual tangible steps in your daily lives to, you know, not be racist.
Okay, so swinging us around to social media again, you're seeing this educative aspect of social media, these kinds of money, your example here, these behaviors. These go out on social media platforms now so that we can all see what can be done and should be done.
Oh, sorry, like what kind of behavior? Sorry.
Yeah, so you talked about how you politely push back to deal with a racist situation.
Yeah.
Is this how social media is being used? Is a broad educative measure?
So I think for the most part, yes. There's definitely like, for example, we've created a space where, you know, you can access different resources for education. We created like different things to watch on Netflix to educate yourself. The documentary 13th, When They See Us, different Ava DuVernay films, for example. So I think I think for the most part, it is an educative place, but it really just depends on, you know, I feel who you're following and I think just the overall, like who's in your circles in terms of your social media space. But I think for the most part, I think there's like a referendum or a sense of like awakening that there is a problem and people are actively trying to seek out resources to better educate themselves.
Okay, and I guess there's no fear of the dark side. I mean, so often we hear these horror stories. Again, a lot of the south of the border are these groups that start trolling your sites and interrupting the discussion, and in fact, use them to organize against you.
Yeah.
Any concerns or any evidence of that?
So we were kind of afraid of that, but none of that actually happened, and we were actually very thankful for that. But like you said, it does definitely happen. And I think we are definitely prepared, I think, if that were to ever happen. Right, Emily? Yeah.
Yeah, I think just we were scared about people coming to the protest itself and like just being ignorant, being rude, and just like denouncing what we're trying to do at the protest. But I think on social media, we've been met with like a pretty good response. We have a few like hateful, racist comments here and there, but that's expected with the community. But I think for the most part, we've had like a really good feedback of people like sharing our things and like reposting our things and just being like really supportive of everything we post and being happy with the resources we're providing with them. Because a lot of people were asking that if they couldn't come to the march, then what could they do from home just because of with COVID, or if you're at risk, or if you're working, like things you could do from home. So we, like Money was saying, like I made a link tree of like Black-owned businesses, of petitions to sign, of like fundraisers, of all these different things you can do from home and just more resources people have. So I think that's like social media in that sense is a great tool to access different resources.
I'm seeing a lot of creativity from the community here with these ideas coming forward and putting them into a common cause.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we've just got a few minutes left, looking at the clock here just on the side. You talked about perhaps organizing a second march. Have you thought into the details of that? What they look like? What would the objective be? And when it may occur? Emily?
A lot of people have been reaching out to us, and like they've been so happy about the march we've just put on. They like, some people have reached out and said they couldn't make the march we put on. Are we planning another one? And I think like just currently right now we are just wrapping up what we're doing. We're just like, we just donated $200 to each charity we chose, to Simcoe Pride and Black Women in Motion. So we're really happy about that, and we're just like gathering all of our information from our last protest we just had. So I think looking in the future, it could definitely be something we plan again, but I think it's still in the woodwork, so it'd still be a while before we see because this was, like Amani was saying, it was a lot to organize, just the two of us, just like getting approval from the town and the police and like putting everything together. So
the road closures.
And the road closures, like it was.
Now we can probably talk to the mayor and get something done there for you. Sorry, Amani?
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, just like, hopefully though that, you know, we live in a world where we don't need to do one anymore. I think that's the goal too. I think now, it's about now people we've given the resources, we've given what, you know, so now I think it's time for people to do the work. And that's not always about going to a protest or a march. Sometimes that's about, you know, reading or watching this documentary, or, you know, how are you going to take, you know, these things in your daily lives.
Okay. So putting resource constraints aside for the second, that you've obviously established a presence here with taking the message out. What should happen next to further this, to take it further and to get more people engaged and to go after the racism issues we've got?
I believe personally that like the news cycle has moved on. The news cycle isn't showing the protests anymore that are happening. They're not talking about Black Lives Matter anymore. The news cycle had their little 5 seconds of fame for Black Lives Matter and they moved on. So I think as people, we need to understand that there may not be more marchers, there may not be no more protests, you may not see it in the news anymore, but that doesn't mean Black people still aren't dying and being treated wrongfully and being murdered by police. I think we need to acknowledge that this is an ongoing issue. We have to fight to change that ourselves. Just because we're not having like the whole world's attention on it at the time, we still can do our work in our day-to-day lives and change ourselves and change our views and educate our friends and our family about it.
Okay, so roughly what mechanisms would that be? Have you got to get more people engaged? Have you got to have broader marches? Have you got to take over the news channels and such? I mean, what is needed here to make a fundamental difference with racism?
I think I definitely do agree with Emily. I think now it's about, you know, in your daily lives, how you're going to approach someone and how you're going to be actively anti-racist. But I think in terms of fundamental, like you said, fundamental changes to racism, I think that has a lot to do with policy changes. And Emily and I personally are in the works of contacting the school board, for example, to implement clear anti-racist policies in the schools, particularly in our region, so that, you know, Black children, people of color have a set of rules or systems or policies that are also going to fight for them. So I think that's a big thing that, you know, that needs to change and that me and Emily are going to work towards. I think also too is also with voting and who are you voting for, and not even just on a federal level, but on local levels, municipal levels. Like, are we going to question these elected officials about, you know, their different, what's their plans? Like, what do they want to do? And what's their stance on racism and systemic racism? And what are they going to do to help further this? Because me and Emily are just, you know, we're just students, right? We're just social activists, essentially. We're not decision makers. We're not politicians. We can't do the actual changes, the policy changes. It's going to be up to now, who are we electing into these positions, even on a local municipal level, that will help us, you know, better our stance and better, you know, racism in our country.
Okay. With that, Amani, just in challenging politicians, and they should be challenged, is it a straight up question on racism or is it much broader about social justice?
Honestly, for me, I would ask like specific questions around, the education system in regards to racism. But yes, for example, it definitely can be a broader discussion about social justice. Like, I think there's a multitude of things you can question and talk about in terms of overall social. There's environmental justice, there's low income, different things definitely you can talk about and question a lot of these politicians. For example, for me myself personally, I would connect racism into the conversation if I were to question a lot of these elected officials.
Okay. Emily, any thoughts on how you challenge politicians, how you call this out so we get structural change?
I think just as voters, we have to be educated on just not our lives as ourselves. So like when you vote as a white man, you have to understand that like, is this politician going to do things for Black lives? Is this politician going to do things for the LGBTQI community? Are they going to do things for things that may not affect you personally, that maybe aren't going to like, isn't going to affect your life because you're not Black and you're not part of the LGBTQ community, but are going to affect like the lives of your friends and your peers and your neighbors and your community. So I think when you vote, you have to not be so selfish and think that like, is this going to help me or is this going to help my community?
Okay. Well, we're just about at the end, and I think it's very important that we let you get the last word in here. So, Amani, do you want to start off? Have you got any closing comments or things you'd like to say to the audience this evening?
Yeah, I think to close, I want to say thank you, Gord, for having us here. This was really nice. I really appreciate this platform that you've done here for us. And just some closing remarks. I think it's important to now, you can visit our page, our Instagram page, under our link tree at Georgian Bay Black Lives, and you can see different things that you can do easily from home in your day-to-day lives that will help you better be anti-racist. We actually have a post that says 5 things you can do directly from home, whether that's donating to organizations, if that's feasible for you, or if that's signing petitions, if that's reading different books that we've put up, if that's watching different documentaries on Netflix or Crave or Hulu, or sharing our page and sharing different stories of Black people, or if that's even supporting the Black people in your life right now. So those are the things that I would say you can definitely do.
Thank you, Manny. Emily, the last 30 seconds yours.
I just want to say thank you, Gord, for putting this together. And I think everyone out there who's listening, like, don't stop the fight. Like, Black lives still matter tomorrow, next week, next year. Keep fighting, keep reading, keep signing, keep educating yourself on this. And thank you for having us.
Well, thank you. I've got 2 wonderful guests here tonight, so you've made it so easy for me. Also want to thank Rogers and their production staff for helping us put on tonight's show, and also to MCC for sponsoring all of the Straight Talk episodes that we do have. And lastly, to you, the audience, thank you for being with us tonight. I hope it was enjoyable, interesting, but I know it was challenging for you. So get out there and take these good ideas forward. Stay safe. Good night.